It intervenes everywhere. It uses its own instrumental reason to manipulate us. It is well organized. In the meantime, it permits its academics and its disenchanted leftists and its lumpen left, I think some of these people can recognize whom I'm talking about, to give us babble about temporary autonomous zones or anti-technologism or irrationalism or not spirituality so much, because spirituality is imagination informed by reason, but spiritualism. Of these people, I say they are obfuscators, together with the postmodernists and together with the whole ideological setup that exists today, with its fetishisms, with its deities, with its discordant voices of pluralism. Now, needless to say, anyone who listens to what I say can also say, oh my God, what a totalitarian point of view. Of course I'm not a totalitarian. I am completely for democracy. I am completely for the free play of ideas and the interchange and challenge and dialectic of ideas. It's absurd to say that because I happen to advance this or a movement I would belong to happens to advance this, believes in totalitarianism. Because Stalin used socialism itself as a means to establish camps and gulags and to destroy, incidentally, the whole socialist movement and as well as the anarchist movement, even the old Bolsheviks. It is, in my opinion, utterly preposterous. This man did not have a theory in his head. What this man was concerned with was power. And he used socialism and Marx and Engels and Lenin and everything else for all their shortcomings as a fig leaf, as an ideological fig leaf for his exercise of power. So I can't answer people who say I'm a totalitarian because I believe in coherence. I can say for very good reason that they're chaotics because they agree with, they call for incoherence. And that they're defeatists insofar as they abandon the principle of hope and the belief in progress and the belief in humanism and enlightened humanism. That's where I take my stand, but not simply because it's my personal opinion. It's a reasoned body of ideas, and people can find them very easily in the books that I have written, particularly Remaking Society, which is quite available from South End Press at a very inexpensive price, The Philosophy of Social Ecology, which will be available from Black Rose Press, and pamphlets that I'm now writing for AK Press in San Francisco, which is a really marvelous group of young publishers who are doing wonderful work. There's where I stand on these things.
I'd like to continue with the idea of irrationality and rationality and participatory democracy. A lot of people these days are saying that electronic mail is going to create a system of participatory democracy where people can engage in study groups thousands of miles apart. What's your take on email?
My take on email is similar to my take on ambulances. That is to say, you use that when you're in dire need. You know, whether you have to go to a hospital or announce something. I'm not going to say that email, or for that matter even television cameras, are necessarily bad. Very few people realize that in 1968, May, June, 68, the TV cameras, many of whose operators had gone over to the students and the workers' general strike, I'm talking of the May-June events of 68 in Paris and in France, used television very effectively to spread the strike because people found out immediately what was happening just by turning on a TV set. Of course, the very opposite could have happened, namely if the cameras were in the hands of agents of the government, they wouldn't have known that anything was happening if they were going to rely on television. I have no doubt that email would be very useful to inform people, say, distant areas like Russia. And we have used email to do that, to try to reach comrades and send them documents. Remember well that in most cases we send documents over email for people to read. In other words, it's just a form of printing press. But the idea basically that every form of communication through email is going to produce democracy is, in my opinion, frightening. The importance of meeting face to face, of looking at one's body language, of even knowing the one who one is looking at, to determine whether one is a sincere person or whether one is a Ronald Reagan who can act like a sincere person, which is what the electronic media also makes possible, is, in my opinion, very important. And as long ago as 1964, I believe either in my essay, Ecology and Revolutionary Thought, or Toward Liberatory Technology, I deliberately put down the idea of electronic democracy. For one thing, electronic democracy does not make for community. The people whom you're, quotes, talking to are literally keeping in touch with you and presenting to you what you want to see if they're trying to convince you, not what they really believe in all cases. And we have no sense of their presence in this world. We don't know in many cases who they are. How do I know if we had a, quotes, electronic democracy, and by pushing a button, red or green, I indicated my support for, my opposition to, or my support for a particular issue, how can I possibly know the people who are doing the same thing, and whether or not my messages or the messages I'm receiving are true or false, whether they truly reflect what I believe, if we're talking about, say, sending someone as a delegate to something or making any kind of decision that involves the delegation of any amount of power. How am I to judge from all of this the authenticity, and I'm not trying to be Heidegger, but still the authenticity of the person with whom I'm communicating, especially since we may have no background whatever. No, I think democracy is protoplasmic. What I mean by that is the flesh has to be there. And at its best, Athenian democracy was based on a thorough knowledge, even biography, of the people who were coming to the town meeting, as it were, or ecclesia, that was organized around around Pericles' time and even earlier. They knew each other. And they had another place where a democratic area existed. It was not just when they got together in an assembly. They often got together in the large, I wouldn't call it marketplace, it's more like a civic center, called the Agora, where they continually engaged in discussion and created thereby a political culture. And there they argued with each other. And they gossiped a lot, and I think gossip is good here, because they found out whether people were sincere or not, whether they were cowed or whether they had character, and the various small incidents that often give us reason to believe that someone has character, means what he or she says, whatever you like. So I am very disturbed by the idea, and this idea was advanced oddly enough by the situationists. I have to tell you that most people don't know it. By the situationists who are now so greatly admired, that electronic democracy makes, that a new electronic superhighway or whatever you have makes democracy more possible. It may make the exchange of knowledge more possible, the exchange of facts. It may let us know what is happening. But that in itself is no substitute for knowing the people in the community that are making decisions with you, their background, their veracity, the extent to which they are people of virtue, to the extent to which they are manipulators, and so on and so forth. Ronald Reagan is an 8-year testament to the fact that deception went on time and time again in the most seemingly sincere and convincing fashion. And people trusted him and his good-heartedness, and it took 10 years or so to unravel that myth that was created by the media about him, or that he, or the means by, or the extent to which he used the media to create a myth about him. We now know him to be, in my view, a complete scoundrel and a liar, consistent liar. So there you see the danger. No, I do not favor electronic democracy. The most one can do with these electronic materials, devices, techniques, superhighways, or whatever you like, is to get information. And an information that can be contradicted, too, you see, that can be challenged. So I do not believe that electronics and democracy, I mean that you'll have more democracy through electronics. You may have a more informed public, and depending upon the society, you may have a less informed public. Remember that reading does not necessarily do everybody any good. There's so much junk around that you can read, and people regard the printed word as so sacred. If it gets into print, it must somehow have been sifted out. It must be real. That they are misled. In earlier times, when people were less than literate, and they didn't have the amount of so-called information. I love that word, information, instead of knowledge. You get information, you don't get knowledge. You learn, but you don't get wise. Well, it didn't have that amount of information, had clearer minds and fresher minds. Not that I favor illiteracy at all, quite to the contrary. But what is important to me is choice, and what is important to me is human contact. What is important to me is the protoplasm of democracy, not its structure, its nervous system through electronic means. I've written against that a long time ago.
Earlier you mentioned that you had inherited a method of reading that allowed you to immerse yourself in the work.
Yeah.
You mentioned that some of the people who read your work don't immerse themselves and therefore don't understand. Can you discuss what that inheritance is?
It came, strangely enough, out of the Marxist movement, and I have to give them credit. They did give me a very profound education. And of course it belongs to a different, that education belongs to a very different era. I'm talking of the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s, before the new industrial revolution of the 50s came along with consumerism and whatever you had. And when I was very, very young, I had entered into the pioneer movement at the age of 9. Pioneers were the communist children's movement. At a time when the communists were extremely ultra-left, unbelievably so. So when I entered into that movement, they taught me how to read. And that at least I owe to them, as well as many other things, both good and bad. Or should I say bad and good. But what they did teach me is enter into the work. Withhold your judgment of the work. Try to find out how the writer is trying to work out his or her ideas. And follow it within the work. Become part of it. And then after, when you complete the work, then you make your judgment and you make your critique. People don't do that today. I'm not going to speak of the fast reading programs in which you're supposed to be able to read a book in 15 minutes, which I regard as absolutely unspeakable. I'm talking of the fast food thing where people don't start with the very first page or a preface for that matter and go right through to the end of the book. They select. We live in an age of anthologies, and anthologies that are made of selections of fun books. We also live in the age of Reader's Digest, not to speak of Walt Disney. And the Reader's Digest has taught us to condense ideas and not to really search them out and follow the thinking out process by which the conclusions are arrived at. And my reading has always been with a pencil in hand. Not always. I didn't want to mar books up too much. Now I absolutely devastate them. I have a Hegel's logic here that I can't read myself because I marked it up from beginning to end with so many notations and references and cross-references that it became a notebook as well as a book by Hegel. But still, to sit down and carefully enter into the work, become part of it, and then afterwards see not only how the conclusions are arrived at, but the process by which they're arrived at, and where there is something to learn and where there is an error. So a series of errors. So that reading process is something that I have cherished. And it'll be a cold day in hell that I will get my reading from an electronic computer screen or whatever electronic mechanism they have. But then I'm not long for this world, so I don't have to worry too much about those problems. No, I read very carefully when I do read.
We're into a generation of children now who are the children of parents who grew up